Hello, and welcome to Release Readiness Live for Developers. My name is Stefan Chandler Garcia, a developer advocate here at Salesforce, and I'm going to be your MC for this session. Today, I'm accompanied by a group of amazing product managers and developer advocates that will talk about this release's new features and answer all of your questions. During this session, we'll make some forward-looking announcements. Remember to make all of your purchasing decisions based off of the features that are currently GA. This session will be interactive, and we are here to help you. So if you have any questions about this release for us, make sure to ask on Twitter, and our fleet of experts will be happy to answer. Make sure you use the hashtag #SalesforceLive so that we can find them. During today's session, we're going to cover a lot of great content, from Lightning Web Security to LWCs inside of Tableau CRM. And there are a lot of fantastic features for developers in this release. That's all from me for now. Now let's hear more about Lightning Web Security from Alba Rivas.
Thank you, Stefan. And hi, everyone. My name is Alba Rivas. I am a developer advocate. And today I'm going to talk to you about LWS, Lightning Web Security. Lightning Web Security is the next generation client-side security architecture for Lightning Web components. LWS is becoming GA for LWC in spring 22, and that is why we are talking about it today. LWS provides the same security features as Lightning Locker, but with a more flexible architecture. This makes it possible to implement many use cases that were not supported with Lightning Locker and that are supported now with LWS. Lightning Locker architecture enforces security relying on non-ideal solutions like freezing, namespace restrictions, secure wrappers which don't evolve with web platform standards, and regular expression filtering. In contrast, LWS uses JavaScript sandboxing to enforce namespace isolation. This means that components from a specific namespace are isolated in their own JavaScript sandbox, which is a virtual copy of the host environment, the browser. Each sandbox has limited access to specific resources from the host, such as global objects, network access, cookie access, and local storage. This is implemented by destoring some native web APIs that are considered insecure in those sandboxes. This way, LWS prevents components in one namespace from accessing private resources or data from another namespace, preventing dangerous vulnerabilities such as cross-site scripting. JavaScript sandboxing has been engineered to enforce and evolve with browser standards, such as Shadow Realms API, currently at stage 3, and Secure ECMAScript, currently at stage 1. The activation of LWS will be seamless for your Lightning Web components, and no refactoring is required. Since this new architecture is much more flexible, you will be able to implement new functionality that was not supported by Lightning Locker. However, bear in mind, very important, if you write code that depends on LWS, it won't be possible to roll back to Lightning Locker. Let's take a look at 4 different ways in which LWS enhances LWC development. First, in LWC with Lightning Locker, it was not possible to programmatically reference a component from a different namespace. This is now supported thanks to LWS. When using Lightning Locker, you didn't have access to the real window, document, and element objects, but to secure versions of them, our secure wrappers. With LWS, you can use a copy of these global objects in which just some insecure APIs are distorted. This translates into an increase of developer productivity. This was sometimes a blocker when using third-party libraries. those that needed access to APIs that were not exposed by these robbers. The new implementation opens up the door to using third-party libraries that were not supported earlier. Finally, performance is also increased thanks to the removal of those heavy abstractions. To help you adopt LWS seamlessly, we have created 3 new developer tools. First, we have created LWS Console. This is a new console, same concept as the Locker console, that helps you find issues with LWS. Add your code to the console and run it with or without LWS activated to see the result. Second, we've published LWS Distortion Viewer. This is a new tool in which all the distortions applied by LWS are documented. It's the same concept as Locker API Viewer. Find information about why we are applying a concrete distortion and, most importantly, suggestions of alternative secure ways to implement your code in LWS Distortion Viewer. And third, we have also created a new Slim plugin with a set of rules to easily find if you are using a distorted API in your code. You can also find if a particular third-party library is using an API that's distorted by running the linting rules over the library code. So, what about our rollout plans? Salesforce plans to progressively auto-activate Lightning Web Security for LWC, but in LWC-only orgs, meaning orgs in which there are no custom Aura components, only Lightning Web components. Lightning Locker will still be used in Aura for some time, and the two architectures will coexist. If Salesforce plans to activate Lightning Web Security in your org, you will be notified ahead of time. You won't need to refactor your components, and they should keep working as expected. Additionally, you can opt in to activate LWS yourself from the setup menu. This is an all-white setting that does not depend on a component's API version, and we recommend that you try LWS in a sandbox org before it is enforced in a production org. Again, remember, this feature is GA for LWC-only orgs. Head to the LWC Developer Guide in order to know more about this amazing new feature. Now, let's see LWS in action. Here we are in LWC Recipes, one of our favorite sample apps in which you can find easy-to-digest code examples to learn Lightning Web Components. We have added a new recipe to showcase how more third-party libraries are supported now with Lightning Web Security. The recipe uses Full Calendar, a popular library to draw calendars in JavaScript. In this organization, I haven't activated LWS yet, so Lightning Locker is preventing Full Calendar from working. This happens because Full Calendar uses some features from global objects that are not available in the secure wrappers that Lightning Locker uses. However, let's take a look at what happens when we activate Lightning Web Security. To activate it, you have to go to Session Settings on the Setup menu and check the Use Lightning Web Security for Lightning Web Components checkbox. Now we can refresh the page. The recipe is rendered correctly. LWS imposes fewer restrictions than Locker, allowing us to use global objects directly, and thereby it supports more third-party libraries. But remember that at the same time, Lightning Web Security secures your components in the same way than Locker does. Let's now take a look at another improvement. In a different org in which LWS is not activated, I've installed a package from the App Exchange called Lightning Messaging Utility. This package includes components to help you display messages and notifications using the Lightning design system. The metadata included with this package belongs to the LTNGMU namespace. Ideally, we could write some code like this to use one of the package components in our custom component, and that way show a notification. But this sort of cross namespace component usage is not supported under Lightning Locker. If we take a look at the page in which we have placed the component, we can see an error. If we open the page in App Builder, we can get more information about the error. We are trying to reference a component from another namespace, and that's not supported with Lightning Locker. Now, let's go to Settings and activate Lightning Web Security in our organization. And let's refresh the page. There we go. The component now renders correctly. We were able to reference a component from a different namespace programmatically. We now have much more flexibility when developing apps. Finally, I want to show you how to install and use the new LinkedIn rules. First, install them with npm, the Node.js package manager. Next, add locker slint config locker recommended to the extents property in your project slint rc. Now everything is set up to use the LinkedIn rules in your project. One way of using them is to take a look at the prompts that appear in VS Code. Additionally, you can run the linter over the whole project by executing npm run lint. That's all for today's demo. Thank you so much for watching. And now I will hand it off to my colleague Kevin, who's going to continue talking about great improvements in this release.
Thanks, Alba. LWS looks amazing, and I'm looking forward to using it. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Poorman, and we should meet on Twitter, where I'm at CodeFryer. Today, I want to talk about everyone's favorite thing, permission set groups. If you're new to permission sets, no worries. Let's do a quick recap. A permission set is a collection of settings and permissions that give users access to various tools or functions. Things like read or write access to a field, or the ability to create or read an entire object. Permission set groups are collections of permission sets that can be assigned to a user as a unit. If we look at this Venn diagram here, you'll see that the red, blue, and yellow circles represent specific CRUD and FLS permissions defined by 3 individual permission sets. The purple, green, orange, and gray segments represent personas within the company that are represented by permission set groups. For instance, sales executives, the purple segment, need both read and write access to account details and read and write access to opportunity details. Sales management, on the other hand, needs read and write access to revenue schedules and opportunity details, but no access to account details. Permission set groups allow you to create fine-grained, specific permission sets regardless of the role that is using them. You can then compose these permission sets into permission set groups that define a job function or a persona. All of this sounds lovely, and some of you may be wondering, what does this have to do with developers? Well, I'm so glad you asked. You see, it's all about unit testing. You are writing permission tests, yes? Good. You see, before Spring 22, making a permission set group assignment would sometimes fail in situations where the permission set's group members had changed, say due to deployment, but not yet recalculated. Before Spring 22, making a permission set group assignment would sometimes fail in situations where the permission set group's members had changed, say due to a deployment, but they had not yet been recalculated. Our crack team of POs and engineers has given us this solution. On this slide, you'll see 2 things. First, a query for the permission set group object, asking for the ID and its status field. If that status field doesn't equal updated, we'll then call a new Spring 22 method on the test namespace called calculate permission set group with the permission set ID as its parameter. This forces the permission set group to recalculate its properties and ensure that any further testing applies up-to-date permissions. So how does this help developers? They help you accelerate your unit testing. By using permission set groups, it's easier than ever to write negative permission tests. You see, you need to know how your code reacts to an insufficient permissions error, because your code should handle insufficient privileges, or you've got a bit of a security hole. Writing unit tests is the best way to quickly debug which permissions a persona is missing. Just make sure that when you log an insufficient permissions issue, that you're logging the name of the permission that's missing. Writing negative permission tests also helps everyone. During Hammer Time, when Salesforce runs every unit test in every org on both the current and next release, your unit tests help ensure that we don't have any uncaught platform bugs before they're released. Finally, having permission set group tests that mimic real-world user personas helps guard against introducing new permissions requirements in a release without adding those permissions to the relevant permission sets. This keeps your users happy. Let's open VS Code. First, let's take a look at the problem we have prior to Spring 22. I've intentionally set the API level of this class to 52. As you can see, we're creating a user with a minimum access profile. We're then querying for the permission set group, assigning that permission set group to our minimum access user, and finally, we execute a test that checks to see if the user has access to the trade style field on account. Unfortunately, in API 52, this can fail if the permission set group's permissions haven't been recalculated since it was modified. This can happen after, say, a deployment. Now let's take a look at a very similar unit test with an API level of 53 or Spring 22. This unit test does the same thing as before, but with an added twist. It's programmatically adding a permission set to the group. You can do that. It then calls the test calculate permission set group method before assigning our current minimum access user to that permission set group. This ensures that when we do our permission checks in this test, that they pass or fail as we expect. Now, as your org adopts permission sets and permission set groups, you might be concerned that you're having to write a ton of negative unit tests. So what I want to show you now is a framework for doing bulk negative tests against your code base with different permission set groups. The idea here is to have built a truth table in a custom metadata object, allowing you to dynamically track which permission set groups should pass or fail for a given piece of code and why they should pass or fail for a given unit test. Let's take a look. First, we'll grab a list of relevant metadata records for this unit test based on the class and the method name. Then we'll grab all of the permission set groups from the database. It's best practice to start with a user that has minimum access profile, so we'll create a user with that profile here. Then we'll execute the rest of this unit test as that new user via system.runAs. What we have to do next is loop over the permission set groups from our query, and for each one of them, we need to make sure that the previous iterations of this loop don't mess with permissions calculations for this iteration. So we'll zero out the permission set assignments for this user, and then assign the new permission set group to the user. We're then going to grab the expected results from our truth table metadata records, matching the current permission set name. Then it's as simple as executing our code in a standard negative test pattern. Once we've caught the exception, we can assert that the exception we caught had an exception message that we expect. Now, of course, this is just a pattern on how you can test multiple permission set groups for your code without writing tons of individual tests. It's not without its limits, however. Note that there's both queries and DML inside a loop the way this is written, so there's definitely a finite number of permission set groups you can test at one time. Additionally, if your code is computationally expensive, you may hit CPU limits. That said, this is a starting point illustrating how this kind of work can be done to help you adopt permission sets and permission set groups without exponentially increasing your unit test burden. And that's it for permission set groups. Let's hear from Amina.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. My name is Amina Jang, and I'm a product manager on Salesforce mobile platform. And today I'll be talking to you about Nimbus, our new feature that brings native device capabilities to Lightning Web Components on mobile. Let's take a look.
To paint the picture for you, let's go through a scenario where Nimbus comes in handy. Suppose you're a field worker in the food delivery industry. When you complete a delivery, you take a photo and attach it to the work order. Well, sometimes customers might disagree and say that the order wasn't delivered properly or at all. However, because you've attached the photo, it gives customer service a more complete picture of what happened. This is an example of Nimbus at work. The world of business has gone mobile, and Nimbus leverages the hardware and software of your device to help you accomplish the unique sets of tasks that are only available on mobile devices. That includes barcode scanning, GPS, and document scanning. So to tie it back to our example, with the Nimbus Media Service plugin, we can access the fieldworker's camera to get more information directly from the field. So what problems are we trying to solve? Firstly, while the performance and user experiences afforded by native device capabilities are unmatched, the effort and cost of native development is inherently higher because it oftentimes requires special skill sets. So you either hire an iOS developer or an Android developer. Secondly, not every company or organization has the latitude to maintain separate code bases for different operating systems. Thus, Nimbus is our intervention into this problem space. It is a hybrid framework that enables access to native OS capabilities from the web. And this is a game changer for 3 reasons. 1. It's scalable. Nimbus offers a cross-platform solution so that customers can spend less time in the weeds of implementation. And since it's delivered from the web, Nimbus plugins can be included in any LWC, but they're only activated when used on mobile devices. 2. It's securable. Our team has developed comprehensive security guidelines to ensure the proper use of these plugins. By owning this technology, it mitigates the risk of our customers using third-party frameworks, which maintains trust. 3. It's extensible. In our future roadmap, we plan to allow for distributed plugin development by members of the Salesforce community. So as mobile development at Salesforce scales and becomes more decentralized, Nimbus is designed to support that growth. Here are our offerings in 236. First, we have Barcode Scanner. This is a fast and reliable way to detect and retrieve data without manual entry. For field workers who deal with inventory and asset tracking, this makes their job faster and easier. Next, GPS provides a way to visually monitor a device's location. For customers that track vehicles and goods on the go, this is one way to add another layer of security to your process. Next is Contacts, which creates a streamlined bridge between your device contacts and your Salesforce instance. For those who require a consistent record of contacts, this is a plugin for you. Lastly, geofencing allows customers to designate boundary areas and send users notifications when they cross into them. There are so many use cases for this plugin, whether it be to provide guidance to field workers as they're approaching a destination, or to supercharge marketing efforts. Getting started with Nimbus is easy. Head over to the LWC developer guide to learn more about Nimbus. From there, you can find documentation and sample code to help you along. Now, let's see Nimbus in action. Introducing Nimbus, Salesforce Platform's new feature that brings native device capabilities to Lightning Web Components. With Nimbus, you can enable users to take advantage of the features built into their mobile devices, including location services, barcode scanning, and so much more. Nimbus plugins are delivered from the web, so they are desktop ready, but are only activated when used from a mobile device. Let's take a look at Nimbus in action to better understand the benefits to your end users. Picture this. There's a networking event for Trailblazers being hosted at Salesforce Tower, and Angela the saleswoman will be attending. At previous events, guests have complained that they had trouble finding important information. As a result, your team has been enlisted to build a custom event app to guide attendees through their night. You want to start off strong, so your team includes the Nimbus geofencing plugin in the app to welcome guests and share important information. Geofencing allows developers to set digital boundaries and navigation points within LWCs. So as Angela approaches and crosses a digital boundary around the tower, she gets a notification with some key information about her visit. It tells her how to check in, where to find refreshments, and so on. This is how you can use Nimbus to create a great first impression with your end users before they even set foot on campus. It's been about 30 minutes and Angela is really enjoying herself. The conversations are flowing and Angela has met some pretty interesting people. She wants to keep in touch with as many of them as she can manage and decides to save their information to her device's contacts. However, she'd like to bring them over into her Salesforce instance so they can be documented as contact records. Luckily, the event app includes the Nimbus Contacts plugin. This allows users to import their device contacts into Salesforce without any manual entry. A few clicks and done. It's just that simple. After a few hours, the event is finally over, but Angela isn't ready to go home just yet. It's around dinner time and your team wants the event app to include recommendations of nearby restaurants for your attendees. But instead of just sharing a list of businesses, your app takes it a step further and provides attendees with a way to navigate to them. Using the Nimbus GPS plugin, they're able to hit up a few nearby restaurants with visual feedback on their current location so that they stay on track to their destinations. With Nimbus, you can empower your end users to make the most of their mobile experiences while on the go. Whether they're event attendees like Angela, field technicians, or retail customers, Nimbus gives you more ways to meet them where they are. The world of business has gone mobile, and native device capabilities enable users to accomplish the unique sets of tasks that are only available on mobile devices. For more information on Nimbus, you can check it out in the LWC Developer Guide. Once there, you'll find detailed documentation on how to leverage these powerful new APIs in your Lightning Web Components. Stay tuned.
And that's all for Nimbus. Thank you so much for watching. And now I'll hand it over to my colleague Ed, who will be sharing some awesome new developments for LWCs and analytics.
Thanks, Amina. Hi, everyone. My name is Ed Mengel, and I'm a product manager here at Salesforce working on Tableau CRM. And I'm here to talk to you about a new feature I'm really excited about, which is how you can use custom Lightning Web Components to create new Tableau CRM widgets and functionality.
In the Spring 22 release, we are launching the ability to use your own custom Lightning Web Component inside a Tableau CRM dashboard. The LWC can interact with the parent dashboard and update when any filter, selection, or data changes. Additionally, you can use this framework to build dashboard controls or just completely change the way the dashboard behaves. The great part about this framework is you get to take advantage of all the existing functionality of Tableau CRM. In the Tableau CRM dashboard runtime, we have widgets. Widgets connect to queries. Queries can be querying Tableau CRM datasets, Salesforce objects, Snowflake, CDP, statically defined data, or even data populated via an Apex class. Then, everything is laid out on various form factor specific layouts and pages. And you can even include widgets and components in tooltips. The out-of-the-box options provide a lot of functionality, but there's even more advanced configuration you can do with bindings and interactions. Queries can communicate with other queries with selections, faceting, and bindings. All queries can choose to subscribe to global and embedded filters. Queries can even dynamically populate an additional widget property, such as a reference line on a bar chart. Now, with this framework, you have the ability to write your own code and use it to render a widget right inside the dashboard. The simplest use case is building a custom visualization or control to render query results and optionally create a way for a viewer to interact with data and select specific rows. The great part of this framework is you can be blissfully ignorant all the complexity of the parent dashboard and have a clean interface to abstract all of this complexity. Let's start by checking out a few examples. In this dashboard, I have a hierarchy widget, a custom radio button, a word cloud, a Chart.js donut chart, and even a graph visualization built with D3. With this role hierarchy widget, I can select various roles and have the corresponding chart show me data rolled up to that level. I also have two Hello World examples down here, and at the bottom, you can see an example of taking an existing Salesforce LWC UI element and plugging it into dynamic data. Now, the power of this framework is in the ease in which non-developers can use and reuse your work. Let's edit the dashboard and see how these are configured. If I click on the product hierarchy and expand the component attributes, you can see there's a few configuration options. In this case, since these attributes are defined as dimensions, I get these friendly pickers to select a valid column from the associated query. If we select my Hello World example here, you can see there's a single attribute, which is the free text title. If I edit it, you can see the component updates right away. This also happens at runtime if I use a binding to make this value dynamic. If we select the progress indicator at the bottom, you can see there's two Boolean attributes. I can use this one to toggle the style between the timeline style and the classic pills for my stages. In addition to rendering results and setting selections and the attributes we just saw, there's more ways to communicate with the parent dashboard. One powerful API is the ability to get and set the current state.
You can use this to completely modify dashboard behavior, or just stay aware of what else is happening in this dashboard. Now let's see how easy it is to get started. First, I open up VS Code with my Salesforce Analytics extension installed. I can hit Command-Shift-P to open up the command palette and choose Create Analytics Dashboard LWC. It will ask me to name my component, so let's go with Hello RRL. Then it will ask me to choose a folder location, and here it asks me what type of LWC I want to create. I can choose with or without a step. In most cases, you'll probably want to choose with step to directly interact with data. So let's choose that now. As you can see, this produces all the template code I need to get started. I have an empty HTML template, a JavaScript file, and the Meta.js XML. Now, if we want to add more hooks, we can add them to the Meta.js here. Let's add a title property to hold the title of the widget defined by the author. See how here I can define additional properties like a description and a default value. Once I've added the property, I can refer to it by name in the JS file using an API. After adding this title variable, I can reference it in the rest of my JavaScript below. Any properties you add will show up in the dashboard designer in the component attributes section here. Also, some people ask how this relates to the existing Analytics Web SDK. Well, the Web SDK isn't going anywhere, but it's good to understand the major differences. The Web SDK is a great way to build apps that control and communicate with a child dashboard. It's great for building rich apps that require dashboard functionality as part of what they do. The LWC framework is a way to make one or more components that can act as child widgets of a parent dashboard. This is great for situations when you want to add a little custom functionality to an analytic dashboard or app. In practice, I find that the LWC framework encourages you to write extremely reusable code, so there's a greater chance that you can reuse code for future projects. One of my favorite examples is this play button. This is a really simple component with only 3 buttons: play, stop, and restart. It works by attaching to a query in the dashboard, and all it does is select each result one by one at a specified interval. When I hit this play button, you can see the dashboard proceeds to select each hole on the golf course. So I can proceed to tell you a story about this exciting competition. This is a great way to show off all the cool animated transitions Tableau CRM has to offer. The really cool thing about this example is how easy it was to make. Let's check out the code on this page. It's only about 44 lines of code, but as you can see, this is really only 14 lines of real code that I had to write. The rest are white space or code provided by the template. Now, the other cool thing is how easy it is to use and reuse this component. Let me show you how it's done. Here I have a simple dashboard that I want to animate. First, I'm going to drag the component onto the canvas and click on it to set it up. Then I'm going to select Lightning Components and the play button. After that, I'm prompted to create a new query. Now I already have one, so I'm going to click Change Data Source and Existing Queries. Let's pick the account type query so we can iterate over each type. Now we can resize and move the component into a good spot and preview the dashboard to see it in action. After I click play, I can sit back and review what's happening with my data, completely hands-free. This is just one of many things you can do with this framework. The real exciting thing is seeing what you and the community build with this. So that's a quick take on LWCs in Tableau CRM. Now I'll hand things back to Stefan.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone watching around the world, and welcome to the Q&A portion of this session. We are very excited to hear from you, and we've already seen some fantastic questions coming in. If you would like to ask us a question live, please mention @SalesforceDevs on Twitter with the hashtag SalesforceLive. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, The first question we have actually came in right at the beginning of our session when we were doing some of the introductions. And that was, has Salesforce renamed the evangelist role as an advocate? And they clearly approve of that. And yes, if you've not noticed, about 12 months ago, the developer advocate team has been renamed from the developer evangelist team to conform with some of the industry standards going on in the space. And so if you see your developer advocates running around at events, live streaming on YouTube, on the Salesforce Devs YouTube channel, that's us, the former evangelists on the team. Now, one topic that we seem to have gotten a lot of questions for today is Lightning Web Security. So Alba's really got her work cut out for her today. So our first question on LWS is for Alba. And that question is, what do I have to do to get started with Lightning Web Security? So Alba, would you be able to address that?
Yes, of course. So, well, first of all, the developer guide for Lightning Web Security, it's very clear, it's very well documented how to activate Lightning Web Security in your organization and the implications that this is going to have, also the new use cases that are going to be supported. If you want to read something that is shorter, you can also take a look at a blog post that we released last week, which is about Lightning Web Security. It's part of our Learn More series. And also, if you want to see some code in action, you can install LWC recipes, because there we have the full calendar recipe that we have just added.
Cool. No, that's great. So at least we now know that they can actually get hands-on with some of the code that we provided as well that they might be familiar with. That's very cool. So our next question is actually a feature that I wasn't as excited about until I actually saw how much that it could do on today's session, and that's Nimbus. So my question for Amina on Nimbus here that we have from Twitter is, do I have to write a lot of code to take advantage of it? Is that something that admins can use too, or is it strictly a developer feature?
So that's a really good question. One of the main goals for Nimbus was to make sure that native device capabilities were available with as little code as possible. So luckily, if your team is already using LWCs in your apps, it should be a matter of adding some new calls to your code. And additionally, each plugin is actually published with sample code that offers insightful examples on how to implement Nimbus plugins in your code. And these examples are complete but minimal. So from there, you can use them as a helpful stepping stone. And on the matter of whether admins or developers should be using Nimbus plugins, they still take code. So ideally, you have some background there that can help you get this up and running. But the idea is to make it as accessible to as many people as possible.
Cool, that's great. Can I ask, are those the code samples in the docs for Nimbus?
Yes, you can find them on the LWC developer guide as well.
Fantastic. That's great. So just a reminder, everyone, please keep your questions coming and mention at Salesforce Devs and use the hashtag Salesforce Live so we can get them in the queue here. So we have a live question coming in for Kevin. And that question is, why should I use permission set groups instead of permission sets?
It's a great question. And I think the answer I'm going to give you is it's easier. I mean, you can assign, you can create hundreds of permission set groups in your org and then assign them all manually, but that's a lot of clicks and a lot of time. And permission set groups allow you to take a collection of those permission sets and assign them as a block. And so it's easier. So long and short of it, when you have your permission set groups, you can just quickly add them all in and go.
That's super helpful and makes a lot of sense. Now, our next question is coming in for Ed about Lightning Web Components inside of Tableau CRM, which was my favorite feature until I saw some of the Nimbus stuff today, but it's still a contender for top 2 in the release. And that question was, what are some of the use cases that you've seen for LWCs inside of Tableau CRM? I know a lot of people already love it. How does this make it better?
There's a lot of great things. And now the stuff that we've come out with, which is open source, I've gotten the most excitement about, like the hierarchy widget. Everybody wants to do hierarchical visualizations and controls. The Gantt chart has everybody going on, and the play button that I demoed has just, everybody's really excited about it. But then seeing what other people are communicating, somebody sent me a sunburst chart, which is kind of like a multi-layered donut chart, breaking things down in multiple layers of a circle, which looked really cool. We've got people building map integration. So we've got people working on Salesforce Maps component and other third-party map, like rich geospatial intelligence. We've also had somebody build an export to CSV. So you could just have like one button and just download the data on that chart or visualization or table like right away. And then another one that was just really cool. I didn't even know you could do this. We have a fixed position of these components. And what they did is they used the JavaScript float and they made it float. So as I scroll down, they can have this fixed content just kind of stay with you. And I didn't know that would work, and it works. And it just looked great.
Nice. That all sounds very cool and practical. So we've got another question that's come in from Twitter. Now, I think this question might have been asked before the Nimbus demo. The question is that there are some JavaScript features that are currently blocked by Locker Service. For example, access to device hardware like a webcam or a microphone, things like navigator.media devices. Obviously, Nimbus solves some of these on mobile, but does Lightning Web Security do any of these or unlock any of these APIs?
The question is for me, right?
Yes, for Alba. Yes, please.
Yeah,
yes.
okay. So yes, probably. So I haven't tested every individual API of those that you mentioned, but with Lightning Web Security, bear in mind that we don't have wrappers for global objects anymore. What we do is to add some distortions only for those APIs that we consider insecure. So if the APIs that you want to use with Nimbus are considered secure and don't suppose a risk for your application, they will probably be supported. What you can do is to run the linting rules that we showed in the demo and find out if any of the APIs that you want to use are distorted.
Cool, great. Thank you very much for that answer, Alba. We've got another one that's come through for Ed on Twitter. And the question is, does viewing the Tableau CRM charts in an LWC require to have a Tableau CRM license? I'm assuming they're talking about bringing those charts inside of core Salesforce in that case. And I think that does require a license, doesn't it, for the user?
Yeah, so remember that these components are running inside of a dashboard. So you're using that dashboard as where you kind of embed or use it or navigate to it. So you need to be able to load that dashboard. That means you need to have either like a growth license, a plus license, a communities license, some kind of license to view that total content.
Cool, great. Now that's very helpful. We've got another one for Kevin now from Twitter. And that is, what happens when a permission set group calculation fails, and how can they get more details from that failure?
That's a good question. So when a permission set group calculation fails, I'm not entirely sure how it would fail. We've got that test.calculate permission set group method that is new in this release. And I don't know, I've never tested it and never found it where it would fail there. Now, what can happen is if you query the permission set group and it has a status of, I believe it's updated. If it's not updated, then you need to recalculate it. And if you do that recalculation, I believe that's I don't know that there's an error state there. I'd have to go back and review the method off the top of my head. I don't think there is one. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean by calculating it and it failing. Perhaps you can follow up on Twitter there, and I can follow up there as well.
Yeah, and Kevin's Twitter handle is @CodeFryer if you want to reference that question as well to him.
Yep.
To make sure that he gets an answer back there. We have another Lightning Web Security question, two of them that relate slightly for Alba. And the first question is going to be, is Salesforce going to be auto-enabling Lightning Web Security?
Yes, so Lightning Web Security is going to be rolled out in a phased approach, and we're going to start rolling it out to LWC only orgs on Spring. This means orgs in which there are no Aura components, okay, only LWC components, custom components. However, if Salesforce plans to auto-enable Lightning Web Security in your org, you are going to be notified in advance. So don't worry about that. And in the future, we will continue rolling out for other kind of org.
And so does Lightning Web Security work for Aura then?
So in spring 22, we are making it GA for Lightning Web Components only. This means that in Aura, we still use Locker, right? And the two systems are going to coexist for a time. That's why we recommend to activate Lightning Web Security in LWC only orgs and wait if you have an org in which you have LWC components and Aura components.
Cool. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. It looks like we have another question on Nimbus for Amina. And that question is, should I use Nimbus or just use native code when trying to access some of these features?
Well, that's a really good question. And I'd say that the answer to that is that it depends. So if your team is building out a fully native app, then it may make sense to use native code, just because that's what you've been doing. Mm-hmm. However, if you're already developing with Lightning Web Components, then Nimbus would actually be the perfect choice. Since these plugins are delivered directly from the web and are compatible across devices, it takes a lot of guesswork out of the equation for you and your team. So I'd say Nimbus.
Cool. Yeah, I can imagine having that cross-device capability is going to be really important for a lot of companies as they scale out in that way with these tools. Now, I have a personal question for you. Where did the name Nimbus come from?
So Nimbus was really just an internal code name that stuck. I can't hear it without thinking of Harry Potter, but now I have a new thing to associate it with.
Great. That's great. Some of the internal product names we won't discuss because this is probably the one that I've actually seen released as the product name.
Yeah.
Cool. Now we have two questions that aren't necessarily for Ed, but I may be able to address. And that's, are we ever going to be able to use Lightning Web Components inside of standard reports and dashboards? And I do not have an answer for that one. It is a fantastic question. And if you want to keep your eyes on the Trailblazer community group for Salesforce developers, I will try and find an answer for that and see if I can give a little status update in the group on Twitter.
I can give you a little detail because we work closely with the operational reports and dashboards teams, and I know Ankido, who runs that team, has looked at there's an idea exchange point gaining some popularity. It's something they're looking at. And I can tell you from my 100% biased point, we are doing more to integrate and kind of unify the tech stacks so that when we build features, operational and Tableau CRM kind of gain from these things. One of the things we just launched as a pilot for operational analytic, the OA step, we call it, where you can query a report type and pull report information into the dashboard, and that can be mixed in with all the other Tableau CRM. So now you can have a report data driving an LWC that you combine in this and mash it up. So we want to see more kind of integrations like that, where this is just kind of this open canvas where you can pull in different types of data, different types of technologies, and just wire it all up together.
That's great to see standard reports having that kind of attention as well. Any ability to expand the use of those reports within Salesforce, I think, is a great add. I will add one of the coolest things that I've seen about Marketing Cloud recently. I'm not someone who's used Marketing Cloud as a developer a lot, but the fact that you could search through your list of Salesforce reports and literally just generate a send list from your Salesforce report in Marketing Cloud, I think is super powerful and sounds quite similar to just being able to generate a dashboard based off of a report that you selected in Salesforce inside of Tableau CRM. I think that's going to be huge for a lot of users. So we've got another question here that's come through for Kevin. And the question is, what's hammer time?
Well, hammer time is, it's a time when Salesforce, it's between releases. So right about now, what happens is we take and we run every unit test in every org, and we'd run it on the current release. So right now we're running it on Winter 22. Then we turn around and then we run every unit test in every org on the next release. And we look at the difference because we want to see if we're having any reversions or bugs that crop up in the next release. And we do that by comparing all the unit tests that you've written in all the orgs to make sure that what passes and what fails in Winter 22 is what passes or fails in Spring 22. And that helps us really narrow down and find what issues might arise before we release. And so this is where one of those times where the unit tests you write actually help not just your org, but everybody in the ecosystem. So if you write a unit test that is looking at permissions or how you do DML or whatever your unit test is, that unit test actually contributes to the overall confidence of the release.
That's fantastic. Now you can go in and see that a hammer's been run on your org, can't you, in setup? I'm pretty sure you actually can go into your org and see the status of the last hammer, but I will confirm that on Twitter afterwards, because I always used to be fascinated going in and looking at that afterwards.
I've never gone in and looked, so I don't know.
Yeah, there should be a tab in setup for the hammer, but I will confirm that after the session. I've got a great question that I'm actually really interested in from Twitter for Amina, and that is, can the Nimbus APIs be used in Experience Cloud? So maybe through Mobile Publisher or one of those types of solutions?
That's a really great question, actually, because in our very first round of getting Nimbus plugins out there, internal customers helped us get off the ground. And Experience Cloud with Mobile Publisher is one that has been taking really good advantage of the Nimbus plugins. So the answer to that is definitely. And to find out more about which Salesforce mobile app teams include Nimbus plugins within their applications, you can refer to the LWC developer guide as well.
Cool, fantastic. And someone's asked about how to get started as well. I'm assuming we can just point them in the direction of the documentation on Twitter, but the feature should be fully documented. Is the Nimbus documentation available already published, or will it be after the release?
Yeah, so it'll slowly be rolling out. We have barcode scanner up because that feature was in beta for a very long time, but the GA docs will be coming out shortly, especially after release.
Okay, and we have another question for Alba on Lightning Web Security. That's, how can we get access to the distortion viewer, and what type of orgs can we connect, like Scratch orgs per se?
So the distortion viewer is going to be available in the LWC documentation with the release. I think this will be Monday, February 14th. And what happens is that the distortion viewer is not something that you connect to your organization. Maybe you have that question because you were used to connect your organization to be able to see your Aura components in the documentation, but we haven't linked the LWC documentation to any LWC feature in organizations since then. So what you will have to do is to navigate to the documentation and just take a look at the distortion viewer there and use it there. Instead of that, what I recommend you to use is to install the plugin for SLint and run the linting rules. Because if you run the linting rules in your code, obviously you have to pull the code from your organization and run that plugin locally. But if you do that, you will be able to find those distortions that are being applied to APIs in your code, if there are.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alba. We've got another question for Ed here, and it's, what about packaged components on the App Exchange? Is that something that we can do with components for Tableau CRM?
Absolutely. Great question. We wanted to make sure we use the LWC framework as much as possible, just as is. So really the only difference with our components are there's a little extra metadata tags that say they can also be used in our framework. So that makes everything packageable, and you can put it on App Exchange and do all of that just like you would any other standard LWC.
Cool. No, that's great. If anyone is curious as well, there is a Lightning component section on the App Exchange where you can go and look at components built by partners, built by Salesforce Labs, that you can download right into your org. So let's see. We have a question here for Kevin around permission set groups. And it's a question that I know Kevin is going to love. And it's, why is it important to test permission set groups inside of Apex?
So your Apex code has the ability to query for instance, fields and objects that your individual user may not necessarily have permission for. And there's a lot of reasons historical for why that works that way. But one of the things you need to do when you make queries or you try to insert data is to make sure that the user has access both to read and write to those particular objects and fields. And if you don't do that, then you can leak data in the query side of things. You can allow access to data that the user shouldn't see. And that's obviously a bad thing, trademarked. And you don't want that. And so when you write your unit tests, you should always write both positive tests. This does what I think it should. Negative tests. This fails like I think it should. And finally, you should write permissions tests. And those permissions tests tell you that they can only access the data that they are expected to be able to see. And you can do that via profile or permission sets or permission set groups, but you should be doing it always. I don't know that they're the most important type of unit test. I would say that's probably still negative unit tests, but they're right up there, a hair's breadth away from being the most important ones. And when you write these unit tests, you want to make sure that you say a user with this profile or this permission set or this permission set group can access this data in a way that I expect. And that's sort of like relying on the platform to do its job. So I don't generally write a lot of those positive permission test cases. I do write a lot of negative permission test cases. What happens when Stefan tries to access data he's not allowed to see? And I want to make sure that my code, quote unquote, fails the way I expect it to. And so when I am writing permissions tests, they're almost always negative permissions tests. I want to see what happens when it fails. And I want to make sure that A does fail, because I don't want Stefan to access this data. I wanted him to get a no data exception or a permissions exception. And then I want to make sure that my code properly reacts to that exception, so it doesn't try to override it and give them the data anyway, all that sort of information. So permissions tests are really important to make sure that you're not leaking data. They're also really important to make sure that somebody who can access a class can't accidentally drop data into the database you don't want them to have access to. So for instance, again, we'll make Stefan our bad guy. We don't want him putting in revenue forecast details because he's not on the revenue forecasting team. And so in order to do that, we're going to make sure that our code properly prevents him from dropping that data into that object. And that's the other half of permissions tests and why they're so important, to make sure that you can't have your data quote unquote poisoned by people who don't have access or shouldn't have access. So again, permissions tests, super important. Negative permissions tests are the way to go. And make sure you want to make sure that your work fails because of permissions errors, and that they fail in a proper and useful way. Maybe you want to record that they failed, or maybe you want to give the user indications that they need to ask for more permissions. However you want to handle it, you want to make sure that you are handling it.
And just to be clear, I'm not trying to access anyone's data. Just a heads up.
I'm just using Stefan as an example, I promise.
And I've got one more question for Amina, and that is it correct to assume that Nimbus will enable LWC-based mobile hybrid development so that we can replace all of the hybrid apps we've built using things like Cordova and Ionic?
Yeah, so Nimbus is fully compatible with Lightning Web Components. So I'd say that it's a great reason to switch over and be using LWCs.
Cool. And for Alba on LWS, can we refactor components to use APIs that weren't previously supported by Locker?
That's a great question. Yes, you can, but if you do that, then you won't be able to go back to Locker. So you can do it, but be mindful about that restriction.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, for all of those great questions and all of those great answers. Just got one last thing to share with you today. Please, everyone, if you want to learn more about this release and all of the new features, please go to sforce.co/learn more. We have written blog posts about all of these topics and more, even things around like the new Open API 3.0 accessibility within external services. So there's lots to learn there. And we go into a deep dive into all of the features, everything we talked about today, all of the documentation, etc. So in that link, there's a trail mix. And if you complete that trail mix by the 31st of March, you'll be entered to win a raffle for a free certification voucher. And with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us today. We will continue responding to the remaining questions on Twitter and the Trailblazer community. So please keep them coming. Thank you and have a fantastic rest of your day.